What I'm going to be talking about during this time is something I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 years, which is what I call the Upper Manhattan Project. And the Upper Manhattan Project is like the Manhattan Project of the 21st century, except it's to save the world instead of destroy it. And please, this is the largest group I've said that to, and don't tell that joke to any physicists that you know. I'm hoping there's no physicists in the room. I don't want to offend anyone. But in essence, it was a 3-year process, which is wrapping up now, that was for the people of Upper Manhattan and New York City, larger New York City, to do a lot of what Paul was talking about, to identify what resilience means for them. And I'll get into the definition a little bit later, but this happened after Sandy. So as you know, tends to happen after a major catastrophic event, the philanthropic sector, government, many other people with resources recognize that there's a big challenge that we're facing, and a lot of money started to get poured into solving that challenge. But the caveat is we only had 3 years. You know, you can create a climate resilience plan and implement it, but you only have 3 years. So, you know, working within that restraint was one of the immediate challenges that we identified in our own work. And while I was doing this, I was a staff member at an organization called We Act for Environmental Justice. I'll talk about them a little bit more in a second. But we knew from the very beginning that in order to create resilience to climate change, we needed more than a 3-year grant. And we couldn't only speak to the 3-year grant because that was a betrayal of what resilience would mean for the people of Upper Manhattan, and particularly communities of color and people suffering from other environmental justice inequalities. So we received a grant to create a plan for resilience to climate change. We wanted it to be a local plan, but we also wanted to create a model that could be applied in other places. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is meant to be an approach for other cities or other communities. And we wanted a platform for wide-scale action across the city. And I make that point because from what I've seen, typically many organizations that are doing this work will center themselves as the change agent. In other words, they're the focal point, or they're the mechanism by which change happens. And for people who want to create change, they come to them, and then everything gets filtered through, and it creates a bottleneck. And in some cases, that might be the correct way to manage something, but it's really my belief that if we want to create resilience to climate change in a timely manner, we have to create a platform for people all over the state and all over the cities that we're in to get involved, independent of centralized organizations. And I use the example of net metering in New York State. Some of you may not know this, but net metering was, the way net metering came about was from a collective, probably from some students that went to Cornell, but a collective that were squatting in the Lower East Side. And they put a windmill on the roof of their building. And they wanted to put energy back into the grid, and they sued the state in order to put energy back into the grid. And that's the genesis, essentially, of net metering. And this was in the 70s. And the list goes on and on. If you think about community gardening, which is a good strategy, that didn't originate necessarily from a government policy. It originated from people in their community taking action and revitalizing vacant lots, and then it gets systematized into a policy. So how can we actually support the ingenuity that exists within our communities and then capitalize on it, rather than saying, if you have an idea, come to us, and then through the process, it'll get implemented somehow. So those are our goals in the process. I wanted to also, in the beginning, thank We Act for Environmental Justice and their members in particular. We act as a membership organization. It was critical for this process to partner with membership organizations. If there's one where you're working, meet them, work with their members. If there isn't one, then start one. And this is also a point I make. If you don't have the social infrastructure where you are, then it needs to be created. And for We Act, this is what a lot of our work in the early stages looked like. It was meetings. During these meetings, we did something called serious games. And the serious games were, or as I call it, gaming the system, was about understanding what would the different scenarios be during a climate change event in the community. So how would a hurricane affect you? How would a blackout affect you? How would a heat wave affect you? Et cetera, et cetera. How would the cost of energy going up affect you? You know, all of these impacts that we're seeing were things that we talked about. And in the end, the plan that we put together was the Upper Manhattan Climate Action Plan. And I'll get into that now. And for just to make a direct connection to something Paul was saying around going to where the people are, you have to know where the people are to go where the people are. And working with a membership organization is a great way to have those people be people that you engage with directly, but they're also going to be a window into the larger community and be able to also talk with people that you will probably never be able to talk to. You know, in many cases, you won't be able to talk to everyone, right? And some people won't talk to you, but they may talk to their neighbor, and we all know how that is. The definition that we use, so I agree with Paul that it's not important for all of us to have a definition of resilience, but I think you need your definition of resilience, and your community needs their definition of resilience. And the definition of resilience that we came up with was that in our resilience plan, the litmus test is that there's no concept that doesn't have a social and an environmental function that's focused on addressing inequality. That's what the social element of it is. And that's essentially, there's a couple, someone asked me recently, you know, what's the hallmark of the plan? And the hallmark of the plan is this. There's one which is the litmus test. There's nothing in here that doesn't have a social and an environmental component. And the approach that we use, the engaged engagement approach, as well as combining design, art, and science as a way of getting people engaged, you know, and as a way of speaking to people's belief systems and representing this topic accurately. And so this is the comprehensive plan. And I know I don't expect people to be able to read it from where you are, but something that jumped out at me is in looking at the images that Paul was showing of social connectivity and resilience, it doesn't look like a hierarchical, it doesn't look like an organizational chart. It looks like nodes around an area. And that's essentially what this looks like if you look at it in the abstract. And that's what it's showing. It's showing that there's different people that are involved in different issues. And if we're going to do anything about this, they're going to have to work together. And if they're going to work together, they should be implementing the community vision, right? That's based on these principles of environmental justice. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. And this is also combining the art and science element of it. Look at many climate resilience plans. They may look like climate resilience plans. Look at this, it doesn't really look like a climate resilience plan. And so that's one thing. I believe in doing things differently as a means of getting people's attention, as well as having substance to it. And also the inspiration for me, I do think that something that's missing from our work is an emotional connection. Again, it was touched on in the previous discussion that community is a feeling. But climate resilience, we don't talk about that as being a feeling. Although the point is to create a good community, you know, to support community well-being. And because community is a feeling, and because our work doesn't convey those feelings, I think people don't have that emotional connection to the work when it comes to building community. And the way that I wanted to build that connection was thinking about how to create a nostalgic element to what we're doing. And I was thinking about, you know, how can we get people to fall in love with this? That's another thing that I think if we all took that upon us to get people the people we're working with, if we could have them fall in love with this work, then we would see a difference. And the way that I fell in love with things, I was thinking about the posters I had in my room as a child. And I was thinking about my favorite posters, which were Michael Jordan poster when he won the dunk contest, and a white Lamborghini Countach. That was the two posters that I love. And I wanted this to be the poster that people who are interested in climate change and climate resilience put up in their office or wherever it is. I don't expect it to go up in their bedroom because we're adults now, but you know, you could put it on your desk. And that is what happened. And it happened actually a little too well, in that people started plagiarizing it, maybe unconsciously, or subconsciously. But this was the art project, and this is what is in the fold out. The brochure folds out into this poster. And then the manual has more detailed research. The way that we got to that conclusion of creating that comprehensive vision was through a process of community-based planning. The community-based planning process is different from the top-down process in that it allows the community to establish the framework. And this is key, the framework and the methods of engagement. And the framework is what is defining climate resilience? In this context, it's essentially defining climate resilience. What does it mean for us? What do we need to change in our community to have it be more resilient? As opposed to, how can this flood wall make your community more resilient? Well, we don't need a flood wall. We need housing. We need something else. So it really is about that, as well as the process. This is how we do our meetings. I can't come to a meeting 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night. And I never will be able to, by the way. And I don't want to anyway, so speaking for the community. But so this is meant to get around that and to use government as a partner that applies resources that can then be reinvested by the community. The key principles in guiding our focus on environmental justice and social equity were what you see here, and I'm using the image to make a point about environmental justice, which is that any crisis that you can think of that people are experiencing now as a result of climate change is something that communities of color and people who are suffering from discrimination have experienced for much longer. And I make that point because as we think about doing community engagement, we don't, oftentimes the establishment, practitioners don't approach the situation that way. They approach the situation by screaming at people that there's an emergency and they have to do something about it, when those people have been screaming for centuries and nothing was done about it. And so a way to build trust is to apply community-based planning that allows people to define what the issues are, not simply saying we have to do something now because it's affecting all of us. It doesn't, you're not going to get very far that way in certain places. This is the getting into some of the research, so you're going to use my remaining time to really get into the details of the plan. And this is just one of the initial pages, and this is the base map for Upper Manhattan. I don't want to get stuck on the fact that this is New York City. We're aware that New York City it has a different context, but the systemic challenges exist everywhere, right? There's the same system that governs New York that governs everywhere. So what I'm going to be talking about is more of the challenges and more of the tendencies. What I wanted to point out here is if you were to look at, there's a couple things you'll notice immediately. The hurricane evacuation zones, as well as the red buildings, which are public housing. The public housing is not difficult to tell is concentrated in the evacuation zones. The other piece of data I just wanted to point out are the members of We Act. And we talked about how critical the members of We Act for environmental justice are. They're located outside of the most affected areas. And this was critical for us to know when we were there. Like, the light bulb went off. If we want to help people, we need to shift where we're focusing a lot of our efforts. But why is this the case? One might be because the We Act office is right here. Another might be because this is a wealthier enclave. And people who have more resources might be in an area that has better services, might have better systems of education. They might have more time to go and participate in things. So there's all of these factors that have to be accounted for. It's not as easy as saying, well, let's go here and do it here. But it's important to know. And what I would ask of you is in the places you're working, where are the most affected people versus where the people are that you're engaging with the most? Are the people you're engaging with the most, these people, or are they these people? And if they're these people, then you need to go down here. If they're these people, maybe part of building that partnerships is going up here. So there's a lot to get from doing this kind of mapping. Something else that we included was looking at this, the impacts of sea level rise. So it's something that we don't sacrifice on, and I also want to make this point in doing community engagement and working with people of color and working with impoverished communities. There's too often a tendency to sacrifice on or forego some of the technical aspects because it's kind of a talking down to people. It's a condescension that occurs a lot of the time. And what I would say is that's not right. There's brilliant people everywhere. Just because they didn't have support in going to Cornell or somewhere, it doesn't mean they're not brilliant and don't have something to offer. And so we need to focus on making information accessible, but not excluding technical information because we think it's not relevant. And so we wanted to include the most advanced technical research that exists, and I believe that we're close to doing that. But not to say that this is that, but looking at this, I agree, we need more visualizations. We see a lot of overhead of sea level rise. We don't see a lot what it would look like in our own communities. And then when I show people this, the light bulb goes off. Oh, okay, we need to do something. So the initial stages of doing this research and of understanding what some of our challenges are were to understand what is inequality in the neighborhood. It's not only about how does climate change affect people, but what is the nature of systemic inequality. And that's fundamental to an environmental justice approach, because that's how you change society. You might be able to mitigate flooding through a climate resilience approach, but you won't mitigate poverty, and as a result, the individual or the family may still be displaced, right? If the goal is to create a healthy community, then you have to look at systemic issues. And this is where it gets tricky around the litmus test that we applied, which is including social and environmental solutions in the plan, because these challenges are immense. And you really have to, I think, challenge yourself to challenge the system, as it were. But if you were to look at this, according to the federal government, the poverty level is $11,000 in New York City, for an individual. According to the MIT living wage calculator, it's $30,000. Some people would say it's even more. In the real world, as we say, you need more than that. But if you were to go by those numbers, close to half the people living in Upper Manhattan are near the poverty line. So resilience for those people is really resilience for everyone. But what does it mean in our society when you have this critical mass of people who don't have resources? I think that has to be our starting point, that in many situations, a critical mass of people do not have resources. And as a result, they have capital, they have social capital, they have intellectual capital, but they may not have resources that they can dedicate to a physical change in their community. And that's where the partnerships come in. The partnerships aren't there to tell people what to do. The partnerships are there to help people do what they think is the right thing to do. I want to just say one thing about displacement, which is that if we don't stop gentrification and if we don't stop people from being displaced out of their homes, we will not have resilience. It's that simple. Resilience for someone who can't pay their rent is being able to pay their rent. It's not getting a better umbrella or whatever, not to minimize what people need, because they need a lot of physical changes too, but it's not the environmental impacts only, it's the social impacts. And for housing, again, it's not something that's a unique phenomenon to New York City. It might be the most egregious example of it because there's a lot of capital there, but displacement is happening everywhere. The housing crisis from 2008 has not been erased. It's evolved, and there's things that are happening, and the model that's being applied in New York is being applied in other places. Some redevelopment around here I saw kind of suspicious of, but talk about that later. There's other data on inequality. In thinking about where we are right now as a country, everything we're seeing around how women are affected disproportionately by certain inequalities, how people of color, how immigrants, et cetera, those are all represented in what we do around climate change. Just because we're trying to do the right thing doesn't mean we're not perpetuating biases within the system. And so we have to also put that at the top and make sure we're checking ourselves in terms of how we do that. After we had these discussions around inequality and what does resilience mean for us, and how would these challenges affect us? How would these climate change events that we're going to be seeing more and more of on a yearly basis affect us? We had a lot of discussions, and we ended up categorizing the plan into these sections. And this is where my role as a facilitator came in, and my role as a planner was to sit down with many rooms of people like this, and to work with people to distill everything. And that's also, I want to add another hallmark to the plan, which is that, and this is what I'm most proud of in doing this, is that people said that's what we wanted. And they said, we don't know what that is, but it's what we wanted. And that's kind of what I want. That's what I wanted. I don't want, and that's really important to me, because a lot of times that step doesn't happen in the planning world. There's a community process, there's a plan, and even if people stand up and say we don't want that, it tends to move forward. And that's the nature of power. And if you want to change systems, you're changing power, and that's sort of what we're doing. So going back to people and saying, is this it? Does this have everything? With discussion. It's not a yes or no. Everything can be qualified. But these are the categories that we had. Here's the partners that worked on the plan. And I'm just putting this up to see the number of organizations, the number of people that were involved. Not all of these people are doing 100% of the right thing. That's not the point. And not all of them are doing the wrong thing. All of these organizations are multifaceted. And it's about, this process was about acknowledging their relevance. Even if you're not engaged, come to the meeting because you have resources that are relevant, that are important. If you are engaged, come. If you're in the community, come. So this really is something that we want it to be. And then you'll see, I'm proud of the fact that also we had, NASA working with community voices heard. We had grassroots global justice, working with the City University of New York. And these are not matchups. This is like a mashup. This is a mix-up. It's a remix of how this work is typically done. I won't go through all of those categories, but I did want to give a couple examples of what we were talking about. The illustrations are beautiful, and if you look at them, they're very detailed. They show some of what these things are. We wanted to develop renewable energy. Renewable energy, as we all know, is key to reducing carbon emissions, but the community also saw it as an opportunity to build local wealth. And building wealth is different from saving money. It wasn't about, and this is where I frustrate my bosses because I get people, I get them excited about things sometimes. And what I would say is, generating wealth or generating capital is more important than saving money. Because if you save money, depending on who you are in these communities, you save it in one pocket, it's going to go out the other pocket. It doesn't matter if your rent bill goes down. If your energy bill goes down, it doesn't matter if your rent bill is going up. But if you're generating wealth, then that's a way for a family to sustain themselves and to accumulate capital. And in the energy, as we know, is how empires are built. It's how countries are built. There's a lot of capital, and there's a need to change the energy system. So we wanted to build rooftop solar. We wanted to build community-owned microgrids. And the ownership aspect is key, and that is in terms of having not only access to installation jobs. We talk about we need jobs, installation jobs. What about the engineering jobs? What about the design jobs? What about the communications and marketing? What about the community outreach? All of these are part of the industry, and it goes back to some of the condescension, what I was saying about people being condescended to. We're going to build renewable energy, and we want to give you jobs, but they're not the full breadth of jobs in the industry. They're the low-paying jobs. And I want to change that, and that goes back to recognizing the brilliance in these communities. But in New York City, we had five solar installers operating in 2005. By 2015, it was 55 companies with 2,700 workers. Let's do equity analysis. Let's do more work to make sure that those benefits are reaching the right people. And the microgrids, as you'll see through the maps, the layered data is what gives you a comprehensive understanding of how resilience can be targeted within specific areas. So we looked at the Basemap, which had public housing and floodplains, community-owned microgrids with those economic opportunities in those places, rather than somewhere else where it may not be more needed. The research comes into play. Emergencies is another, something else that we talked a lot. There's not a lot of people. How many people have a evacuation plan for their community that they worked on with their community? It doesn't exist. And yet we know we're going to have to evacuate more and more. We're going to have more crises. And we know that from the state or from the city, from a government perspective, it's very difficult to do what a community can do. The government cannot do what a community can do. They can't go knock on everybody's door and make sure they're okay. They may not know where the most vulnerable people are. but the community does. But there's not a system to support that. The emergency system is a broadcast system. It's not a system based on a multinodal resilience plan. So we wanted to think differently about how to do emergency preparedness. One project that I would love to work on with the people in this room and with Cornell University is what we're calling EPIC, which is the Emergency Preparedness Information Kiosk. This is an installation. You can see a rendering right here. There's me with some of the members we were working with and the public housing projects that we're planning on installing this, and it's going through the process right now for this particular place. But this is a mobile installation that's programmed by members of the community to provide services during an emergency and to provide education during other times, to do other engagement. And so this, if you look at an installation, a lot of times in an emergency, the low quality housing will lose access to services first, right? And if you think about where public housing is in the floodplain, show you more about that in a second, they're going to lose services. Having an installation that has not only access to emergency communications, to renewable energy, but also has educational information and spaces for programming, so they're doing things when there's not an emergency to build that social cohesion, is something that we hope, and this again came from the community, so there's buy-in already. You want that, you don't want to just parachute it in. It's something that can be a resource for people, and this is mobile, and so it can go to different, when there's a crisis, it can go and be part of a network. And may perhaps even go to one of our colonies one of these days. This is something we're working right now. A little bit of it is modeled off the Red Hook Initiative, just to provide a case study. Red Hook Initiative was launched during Sandy when public housing in Red Hook lost. Red Hook is in Brooklyn, waterfront community that lost, not the other Red Hook, but this one lost power, and there was an initiative to create a message board and provide some other human engagement that was filling a gap that the city was providing to really help people on a granular level, people who were slipping through the cracks. And it worked out really well, and now it's part of an initiative that is being supported by the state to build a microgrid there that Red Hook, that RHI is going to be a part of. So all of this comes together at the end to create greater resilience. Urban heat island, another big factor. Again, using illustrations, using diagrams to kind of illustrate the concept. Using research that we did actually with researchers at Buffalo State University to use LIDAR radar to measure surface temperature and other environmental features. So to help with our research, again, going back to those maps. Food systems was important. The Corbin Hill Food Project is a great example of a community CSA that has a farm in Cooperstown but provides food for, but was started by people of color in New York City and provides food for EJ communities. Social hubs is another concept, and this is where I think this plan really shows how different it is from other resilience plans, in that what we heard from the community and the people we're working with is, look, we just want more space to do our own thing. We love WEACT and we love in different environmental organizations, but we have ideas too, and we want a space where we feel more in charge and where we can develop these ideas out further. Maybe if we had a huge space with everything, it would be different, but social hubs are a place for people to come together that are self-managed, for them to engage in development of resilience initiatives and to prototype some things. And then what the plan is that then goes into a larger project to build social cohesion so that these social hubs can be useful in say something like a heat wave and become the place where people are going for refuge. Wrapping up here, an example is Immigrant Movement International for a social hub. When I was mentioning, this is East Harlem, so all those public housing projects that you saw that were in the floodplain, because they were built in here, they were built where nobody else wanted to build, and that tends to happen with a lot of our low-income housing. If you, an example of something, multi-purpose facility, this water square in Rotterdam, which is a park, but when it rains, it turns into this water feature to sustainably manage the water. A New York project that we've also been focusing on and would like to see happen is the redevelopment of the 135th Street Marine Transfer Station, former waste transfer station in the Hudson River in Upper Manhattan, now abandoned building, being stripped of parts as we speak. Every time I go, there's more parts missing. But this is a social hub. This is a potential social hub. This is a place that can be used for environmental research, for building these enterprises that allow people to not only improve the environment in their community, but also build the capital that they need to sustain themselves. Something fun at the very end of the book is the power map, and this goes to who's involved. So, the hope was if someone wants to get involved from the community, let's encourage them to get involved however they want, right? We have a lot of people, we have a lot of brilliant introverts, we have a lot of extroverts, we have a lot of people who aren't going to thrive in every environment, but if there is someone who wants to do community work on transportation, et cetera, there's ways for them to find out. And it's also interesting to see the range of who's involved, how are they involved, and this is the node. This is the map of what the different stakeholders in doing and having impact on climate in New York. For myself, moving forward, I'm continuing to work with We Act for Environmental Justice on implementing specific projects around the Upper Manhattan project, as well as implementing this as a model in other places through resilience workshops, and using this as educational material. This is curriculum-based material, so I would also encourage people when you're doing planning, when you're doing research and design, take a curriculum-based approach. So people like the members of these organizations that you're going to be working with have it as a tool, not just projecting information, but have tools for them to use, as well as doing more research, partnership facilitation, and building and designing additional projects. Something, I'm not sure if you can see it that well here, but this is my last slide. Something else that I developed recently as a way to pilot this approach is Resilience, a game of strategy for climate change, which is a board game, as I'm calling it. And it's actually a poster. I'm going to hang it up here, or I'm going to hang it up somewhere around here. And I would like for the course of 2 days for people to engage with it. The way that you engage with it is through illustrations and through writing. So you write 17 questions or 17 solutions for creating resilience. In those solutions, you have to identify what the solution is. You also have to identify who your partners are and what the social and environmental impacts will be. And you have to draw, so there's an element to get people out of simply thinking about things in a technical manner. And at the end, it's scored. I scored the Upper Manhattan plan, and we got a 216 out of 289. So it's not bad, but clearly it's not easy creating resilience. But I'm sure I hope that we'll score better here over the next few days. So that is the Upper Manhattan project. Once again, it's a project to save the world instead of destroy it. Don't say that to any physicists that you know. And it's an ongoing process. I want to thank all of you again for being here and for allowing me to share this with you. I look forward to talking with you in more detail about this plan and hopefully developing some ways to collaborate moving forward. Thank you, everyone.